He was only a child. Climbing into the sanctuary, his father built a treehouse that should have been a symbol of joy, safety, and childhood wonder. But what began as laughter high in the branches ended with screams that shook an entire neighborhood. A woman with power, blinded by prejudice, decided that rules mattered more than a child's life. And in one horrifying moment, her obsession turned violent. A boy was left broken on the ground, and the community forced to confront an ugly truth. How could something so innocent become the target of such fury? And how far would one person go to prove their control? It was the kind of summer that children remember for the rest of their lives. The air was thick with the smell of freshly cut grass, the sound of sprinklers ticking across front lawns, and the chatter of neighbors tending to flower beds. For 10-year-old Marcus, it was a season of laughter and discovery. His favorite place wasn't the living room, the video game console, or even the basketball court down the street. It was high above the ground, nestled in the branches of the oak tree in his backyard. The treehouse wasn't much to outsiders: wooden boards nailed together, a rope ladder swinging gently in the breeze, a window carved out just wide enough for him to wave to his mother when she came home. But to Marcus, it was everything. It was a castle, a fort, a place where he could be anything he wanted to be. It was where he and his friends swapped snacks, whispered secrets, and planned adventures that stretched far beyond the cul-de-sac where they lived. His parents, Danielle and James, loved seeing him there. Life had not always been easy. Danielle worked grueling shifts as a nurse, while James spent long hours in construction, his hands calloused from years of hard labor. They weren't rich, but they worked tirelessly to carve out a slice of stability in a suburban neighborhood that promised security. The treehouse wasn't just Marcus's escape. It was a reminder of why they had sacrificed so much to give their son the simple joys of childhood. From the outside, their neighborhood looked like the picture of calm. White fences, manicured lawns, and a homeowners association that boasted about keeping standards high. But beneath the surface, not everyone was happy about the Johnsons living there. They were one of only a few black families in the subdivision, and though most neighbors kept their distance with polite smiles, some let their disapproval show in sharper, quieter ways. At the center of that scrutiny was Karen, the president of the HOA. She had lived on the block for years, her reputation for strictness known by everyone. She kept her hedges trimmed to perfection, filed complaints over paint colors she didn't like, and wielded the HOA handbook like it was law carved in stone. Residents whispered her name in hushed tones, some mocking, some fearful. But one thing was certain: when Karen decided something didn't belong, she found a way to make it disappear. The Johnsons knew her type. That's why they made every effort to stay invisible, paying HOA dues on time, following every rule, nodding politely at meetings. They wanted peace, not problems. And for a while, that seemed possible. Until the treehouse went up. From the moment Karen laid eyes on it, her expression soured. She claimed it was against the rules, unsafe, an eyesore. To Marcus, it was just a treehouse. To Karen, it was a challenge to her authority. Her first move was a letter, folded neatly and left at their door. Then another, each one harsher than the last. Danielle crumpled them up before Marcus could read them, hiding the venom between the lines. Words like violation and non-compliance stung, not because of what they said on paper, but because of what they implied. Marcus didn't see the notes. He didn't notice the way Karen's SUV slowed when it passed their home, her eyes fixed on his sanctuary. He only saw the world from his window in the branches, the laughter of his friends, the sunlight spilling across the lawn. But Danielle noticed, and James noticed, and in their hearts they feared what Marcus couldn't yet understand: that for some people, it wasn't about rules. It was about control. About reminding their family that no matter how hard they worked, no matter how polite they were, they would always be seen as outsiders. Still, they held on to hope. Maybe the letters would stop. Maybe Karen would turn her attention elsewhere. They reassured Marcus that the treehouse was his, that no one could take it away. But each time Danielle caught Karen lingering at the property line with her phone out, snapping photos, the knot in her stomach grew tighter. Neighbors began to whisper too. Some sympathized, but only in private. Others nodded in quiet agreement, with Karen unwilling to confront her wrath. The Johnsons stood alone in the middle of the storm, trying to hold on to a fragile sense of normalcy. And through it all, Marcus kept climbing that rope ladder, oblivious to the shadows gathering below. The treehouse swayed gently in the summer breeze, laughter spilling from its wooden walls. But what neither he nor his parents knew was that this simple joy had already become a battleground. One ordinary afternoon, Danielle stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing dishes as the smell of garlic and onions filled the air. Marcus was outside, his voice echoing through the open window as he pretended to be a soldier defending his fort. She smiled until she caught it. A flicker of movement near the fence. A figure standing just beyond the hedge. Watching. Waiting. The breeze carried Marcus's laughter, but beneath it, there was something else. Something darker. The feeling that the ground beneath their family was beginning to shift. And though they didn't know it yet, that shift would soon collapse into violence, changing Marcus's childhood and their lives forever. The first sign that the tension was shifting came in the form of paper. Another letter, but this one wasn't folded neatly. It was shoved into the mailbox with force, the edges torn, the words underlined with a kind of venom that couldn't be hidden behind official language. Danielle read it twice, her stomach sinking. Remove the unauthorized structure immediately. Last warning. She didn't let Marcus see it. She stuffed it deep in the trash, but even in silence, the letter lingered like smoke. Karen's presence grew bolder. No longer just notes, no longer just whispered complaints at HOA meetings. She began parking her SUV at the edge of the Johnsons' yard, engine idling, her eyes locked on the treehouse. Sometimes she sat there for 10 minutes, sometimes longer. Danielle would glance out the window and see her silhouette, motionless, like a predator waiting for its chance. One afternoon, as Marcus scrambled up the rope ladder, she lifted her phone and snapped pictures. Click after click, the shutter sound slicing through the warm air. Danielle rushed outside, her heart hammering. "Why are you taking pictures of my son?" she demanded. Karen smiled, thin and sharp, her reply delivered with the same rehearsed calm she always used. "Rules are rules." Then she walked away. But Marcus had heard. He clung to the rope, confusion etched across his face. "Why doesn't she like me?" he asked later that night. Danielle's chest tightened. She wanted to protect him from the truth. But how do you explain to a child that sometimes hate hides behind polite smiles and printed handbooks? Soon, it wasn't just photos. Karen escalated her complaints, pushing the HOA to issue formal warnings. Meetings turned hostile, filled with phrases like neighborhood standards and safety concerns. Everyone knew whose backyard was under attack. And while some neighbors offered hushed sympathy, no one dared to confront Karen openly. Silence wrapped around the Johnsons like a cage. Still, Marcus played in his treehouse. Still, he waved from the wooden window, his laughter drifting over the fences. But Danielle noticed the way Karen watched him now. Her eyes narrow, her lips pressed into a hard line. It wasn't just annoyance anymore. It was obsession. Then came the day Danielle would never forget. The sun was dipping low, staining the sky in gold. Marcus had climbed into his fortress with a book, his legs swinging lazily as he hummed to himself. From the kitchen, Danielle could hear him, that soft hum mixing with the clatter of pots as dinner simmered on the stove. And then, a new sound cut through the air. A harsh, grinding scrape. Metal on wood. Danielle froze. Her hands went cold as she turned toward the window. There, at the base of the tree, stood Karen. Her hands gripped a saw, her face twisted in concentration. Each pull of the blade bit deeper into the wooden supports. Splinters flew. The tree shuddered. Above, Marcus's laughter vanished, replaced by a cry that sent every hair on Danielle's arm standing on end. "Mom!" Her body moved before her mind caught up. She bolted from the kitchen, the screen door slamming behind her. "Stop!" she screamed, racing across the yard. But Karen didn't stop. Her strokes grew faster, more violent, like a storm tearing through everything in its path. Neighbors stepped out of their homes, drawn by the shouting. Some gasped, some whispered. But no one moved forward. They only watched. "Get down, Marcus," Danielle cried. But her son was frozen, clutching the railing as the treehouse shook beneath him. His wide eyes locked on hers, begging for help she couldn't give fast enough. The saw screeched louder. The wood groaned. And then, with a sharp crack that split the evening air, the support beam gave way. The treehouse lurched. Marcus's body was thrown forward. His scream tore through the neighborhood as the structure collapsed beneath him, boards splintering, nails shrieking as they ripped free. Danielle dove, arms outstretched, but she was too far. She reached him only as his small frame hit the ground with a sickening thud. Her knees slammed into the dirt, her arms scooping him up, her sobs spilling into the silence that had swallowed the street. He was alive, bruised, scraped, shaken, but alive. His tears mixed with hers as she rocked him against her chest. "I've got you," she whispered, though her voice broke with terror. Karen stood above them, the saw slipping from her hands, clattering to the ground. She didn't apologize, didn't rush forward. She only muttered, cold and detached, "I warned you." And then she turned, walking away as if she hadn't just shattered a child's world. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had finally called for help. An ambulance pulled up, red lights painting the white fences in streaks of fire. Deputies followed close behind. Marcus was lifted onto a stretcher, Danielle clutching his hand as she ran beside him, refusing to let go. But the questions burned even hotter than the fear. Would the deputies treat this as the crime it was? Or would Karen's influence shield her, as it so often shielded people like her? For the first time, neighbors began to murmur louder. Some shook their heads. Some muttered words like "unbelievable." A few even dared to pull out their phones, showing deputies the photos and videos they'd captured. Proof that this wasn't an accident. Proof that a line had been crossed. As the ambulance doors slammed shut and pulled away, Danielle caught one final glimpse of Karen, standing with her arms folded, watching the chaos she had created. Her expression wasn't guilt, it was defiance. The Johnsons weren't just fighting for a treehouse anymore. They were fighting for justice, for their son, for the right to feel safe in a place that had promised them safety. And now, the battle was no longer in their backyard. It was heading straight into the courtroom, where the truth would either be buried or finally be seen. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their cold hum cutting into the silence as Danielle sat by Marcus's bed. His arm was bandaged, his ribs bruised, his small body swallowed by the white sheets. Machines beeped steadily, each tone a reminder that he was alive but fragile. Danielle held his hand, her thumb brushing over his knuckles, her mind replaying the moment of the fall on a loop. The saw, the crack, his scream. It was seared into her memory like a brand she would never escape. When the deputies arrived at the hospital, she braced herself. Too many times before, stories like hers ended with excuses, with words like misunderstanding or neighborhood dispute. But this time was different. Witnesses had spoken, phones had recorded. There was no denying what Karen had done. The deputies didn't hesitate. They walked into her pristine, manicured home, where she sat sipping wine as though nothing had happened. They placed her in handcuffs, her disbelief boiling into outrage. "This is harassment," she spat, struggling against their grip. But the charge was clear. Felony assault with a deadly weapon. The community was stunned. For once, the system seemed to move in the right direction. But Danielle knew this was only the beginning. Karen had influence, money, and friends who sat on the HOA board. She would fight tooth and nail to twist the story. The courtroom became the new battlefield. Danielle sat in the front row, her hands clasped, her heart pounding as Karen entered in a neatly pressed suit, her hair pulled back, her expression calm and composed. She didn't look like a woman who had nearly killed a child. She looked like a victim rehearsing her role. Her lawyer wasted no time. This was not assault, he insisted. It was an act of property maintenance, a community safety issue. The treehouse was built without approval, and Mrs. Winters was only ensuring compliance. The words burned. Danielle gripped the edge of her seat, fighting the urge to shout. Property maintenance? Marcus was nearly crushed beneath collapsing boards, his body thrown like a rag doll, and Karen called it compliance. The prosecutor rose, his voice sharp, his tone unwavering. This wasn't maintenance. This was malice. We have video evidence. We have witnesses. And we have a child, an innocent child who will carry the scars of this day for the rest of his life. The jury leaned forward, eyes narrowing as the video played. Karen's figure filled the screen, the saw tearing through wood, the treehouse trembling above. Marcus's cries echoed through the courtroom speakers, raw and unfiltered. Gasps rippled through the room. Some jurors covered their mouths. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Danielle couldn't watch. She buried her face in her hands, her body trembling as the sound of her son's fear filled the chamber. But she forced herself to look at Marcus, sitting beside her with his small frame hunched, his eyes wide. He didn't need her to hide. He needed her to be strong. Then came Karen's turn to testify. She stood tall, her voice smooth, rehearsed. "I regret that the child was injured," she said, carefully avoiding Marcus's name. "But my actions were within my rights as a homeowner. The structure was unsafe. It could have fallen on its own at any time. I was protecting the neighborhood." Her words dripped with cold calculation. She didn't falter. She didn't flinch. She looked the jury in the eye as though daring them to doubt her. But Danielle saw the truth. The slight curl of her lip. The flash of annoyance when Marcus whimpered quietly beside her. The mask slipped in tiny cracks only a mother who had suffered could recognize. The prosecutor pressed harder. "Protecting the neighborhood? You were warned repeatedly to stay off that property. You escalated from letters to harassment to destruction. You knew a child was inside, and yet you continued. This wasn't protection. This was violence." Silence hung heavy. The jury shifted, their pens still, and then the prosecutor turned, his voice lowering, his gaze sweeping the room. "Ask yourselves if this child didn't look the way he does, if this family didn't live the way they do, would we even be here? Or would Karen Winters still be walking free, drinking her wine, while a child lies broken because no one dared to hold her accountable?" The words cracked open the unspoken truth. The courtroom stirred. Whispers spread through the benches. Because everyone knew this wasn't just about a treehouse. It was about race, about power, about the way prejudice could be dressed up in paperwork and policies until it became lethal. Danielle held her breath, her nails digging into her palms. The judge's gavel struck, calling for order, but the tension refused to fade. The air felt charged, every heartbeat waiting for what would come next. The trial stretched on, each day piling evidence against Karen. Photos, testimonies, medical reports. Yet, the defense fought with equal ferocity, spinning the story, painting Danielle as irresponsible, painting Marcus as reckless, until the final day. The jury filed back in, their faces solemn, unreadable. Danielle's pulse thundered in her ears. She clutched Marcus's hand so tightly he winced, but he didn't pull away. He held her just as firmly, his eyes on the floor. The foreman rose, paper in hand. "On the charge of felony assault with a deadly weapon." A pause stretched, suffocating, unbearable. "We find the defendant." Danielle closed her eyes. "Guilty." The word hit like a wave, crashing over the room. Gasps erupted. Karen's composure shattered, her face contorting in disbelief, in rage. She shouted, her voice breaking, but the gavel slammed again and again until the room settled. Danielle exhaled, tears spilling down her cheeks, her body trembling with release. She pulled Marcus close, his small arms wrapping around her neck, his whisper muffled against her skin. "Is it over, Mom?" She kissed his forehead, unable to speak, because deep down, she knew it wasn't over. The scars would remain, the fear would linger, and the fight against a system that had nearly failed them would never truly end. But in that moment, as Karen was led away in handcuffs, the balance had shifted. For once, hate had been named for what it was. For once, a child's pain had been seen, and for the first time since the saw tore through wood, Danielle felt the faintest glimmer of justice. The gavel's echo faded, but the weight of the verdict lingered long after the courtroom emptied. Outside, the cameras flashed, reporters swarmed, and neighbors whispered. Danielle shielded Marcus from the chaos, pulling him close, her body tense as microphones pushed toward her. She said nothing. Not because she didn't have words, but because no sentence could capture the storm that had consumed her family. Back home, the house felt different. The backyard, the once joyful heartbeat of their lives, was now scarred by the absence of the treehouse. Only splintered wood and deep grooves in the grass remained, like open wounds refusing to heal. Marcus stood at the edge of the yard, silent, staring at the empty branches. His fortress was gone, and with it, a piece of his innocence. Nights became restless. Danielle would wake to Marcus crying in his sleep, his small body trembling with nightmares of falling, of wood breaking beneath him. She would hold him until dawn, whispering comfort, even though her own dreams were haunted by the image of him plummeting through the air. Trauma had wrapped its arms around them both, and letting go would not come easily. Yet, amidst the grief, something began to shift. Messages poured in from families across the country. Parents who had faced harassment from HOAs. Mothers who had endured the silent weight of racism disguised as rules. Children who had felt unwelcome in the very neighborhoods they called home. Their words were filled with anger, with sorrow, but also with solidarity. Danielle realized their story was no longer just their own. It was part of a larger pattern, one that too often went unseen, dismissed as misunderstandings, minimized until it became deadly. The saw in Karen's hands wasn't just a tool. It was a weapon sharpened by prejudice, wielded with the belief that she could destroy without consequence. The conviction sent ripples through the community. Some neighbors who had once turned away now avoided Danielle's eyes out of shame. Others cautiously approached, offering apologies, casseroles, or awkward words of support. A few, the bravest, admitted aloud what everyone else had silently known. Karen hadn't acted out of concern for rules. She had acted out of resentment, fueled by the simple fact that the Johnsons didn't look like her, didn't live like her, didn't belong in the box she wanted to keep her neighborhood in. Still, the victory felt fragile. Karen's lawyer announced plans to appeal, her supporters muttering about overreach and political correctness. Danielle understood then that justice in a courtroom was only one battle. The deeper war, the one against prejudice and the systems that enabled it, raged on. For Marcus, healing came slowly. Physical wounds faded, but fear lingered. He hesitated to climb playground equipment. His confidence cracked. One afternoon, Danielle found him sitting by the window, sketching in silence. On the paper was a treehouse, taller than the one his father had built, stronger, with wide walls and bright flags waving from its roof. "Is that your treehouse?" she asked gently. Marcus nodded. "But this one, nobody can tear down." Tears pricked Danielle's eyes. She knew then that even in pain, resilience could bloom. Her son was already rebuilding, not with wood and nails, but with imagination and hope. Community activists reached out, urging Danielle to share her story publicly. At first, she resisted, fearing the scrutiny, the judgment, the reopening of wounds. But eventually, she stood before a crowd at a local rally, her voice trembling at first, then steadying as she spoke. She told them about the letters, the photos, the saw, and the fall. She told them about the silence of neighbors who looked away, and the courage of those who finally stepped forward. And she told them about Marcus, about how one child's laughter had been targeted by hate, but also how one child's survival had forced a community to confront its reflection. Her words spread online, shared by thousands, then millions. Strangers wrote to say they were rethinking their neighborhoods, their policies, their own silence. Teachers used her story in classrooms. Parents discussed it around dinner tables. A single act of cruelty had become a spark for conversations long overdue. Yet Danielle knew awareness wasn't enough. She carried the weight of responsibility now to keep speaking, to keep pushing, to keep reminding the world that racism doesn't always wear a hood or shout slurs. Sometimes, it hides behind fences and bylaws, behind smiles and signatures, until the mask slips and the violence erupts. As months passed, Marcus grew stronger. He returned to school, his classmates crowding him with cautious questions. He told them he fell, but he also told them he got back up. Slowly, his laughter returned, softer at first, then louder, like a bird relearning its song after a storm. Danielle found herself watching him with both pride and sorrow. Pride that he endured, sorrow that he ever had to. Childhood was supposed to be filled with scraped knees and late-night stories, not courtroom verdicts and nightmares of saw blades. And so, the story ends, not with complete healing, not with the past erased, but with survival. With a mother and son still standing, still loving, still daring to dream. But it also ends with a challenge. Because the truth is, this wasn't just about one boy in one neighborhood. It's about every place where prejudice hides in plain sight, where rules are used as weapons, where silence enables cruelty to fester until it explodes. The question now is not whether Marcus will recover. He will. The real question is, will we? Will we learn? Will we act? Will we finally confront the everyday racism that turns childhood joy into battlegrounds? Because until we do, there will be more treehouses torn down, more families scarred, more children left asking why. And maybe the hardest truth of all is this: silence will not protect them. Only courage will. A treehouse. That's all it was meant to be. A place for laughter, for safety, for the kind of memories every child deserves. But one woman's prejudice turned it into a battlefield, and one boy's fall exposed something far bigger than wood and nails. Because the truth is, this wasn't just about Marcus. It was about every child who's been told they don't belong, every family who's been targeted for nothing more than the color of their skin. It was about the silence of neighbors, the power of institutions, and the danger of ignoring hate. Until it finally explodes, Marcus survived. But what about the next child? The next family? The next neighborhood still pretending not to see? The story you just heard isn't fiction, it's a reflection of a reality that still plays out every day. And it asks us one question: if hate can tear down a treehouse, what else will we allow it to destroy before we finally stand up?